Hello, I am Larry Weinberg, the Rum River Arts Center Director. This may be your first project or you've done several in the past. This is going to be a quick tour of RRAC and what we have to offer you as a participant, volunteer, and maybe even as a donor. Our mission at the Rum River Arts Center as a 501(c) nonprofit organization is to make a difference through art, being a welcoming and inspiring environment for artists of all ages. So you can explore your creativity through our classes, collaboration, and partnerships in the North Metro. Our history is that we began in 2009 as a small 500 square foot studio and have expanded to well over 5,000 square feet. We have many different areas that is like a maze here at the Rum River Arts Center. We're located in a historic milk factory along the Rum River in Anoka. We have several programs and partnerships that we do with kids, teens, adults, older adults. We have a new ceramic program that with wheel and hand-built pottery, where we have a whole community of potters that have started here. We have summer camps. We do programs with the libraries, with the school districts, and the local communities in the North Metro. We have several different mediums that we use here at the Art Center: drawing, acrylic painting, watercolor painting, mixed media, hand-built pottery, wheel throwing pottery, mosaics, polymer clay. We do stained glass and many more. One of the big programs we do at the Art Center is our summer art camps. And in 2021, we're expanding the program to include older adults with 5 or 6 new camps that are geared just to older adults. We have over 40 different programs for kids, and they can be either half day or all day. Since we're a nonprofit art center, we depend on you to help us run the organization. We need donations, we need volunteers. It all makes a difference. We are 95% funded by people like you by taking classes or making donations. Both monetary and in-kind donations are able to keep the Art Center thriving in any time. You can donate online. You can come in and visit us. All donations are tax deductible. Please enjoy the class.
So today what we have for materials, we have watercolor paper, and I like Arches. I also like Fabriano. Strathmore is another good one. Blick makes a wonderful watercolor paper. So you can have your watercolor paper. It's 140-pound cold press, and that just means that the texture is, there's some tooth to it. It's not a smooth paper. So I like that one in particular. I've got an HB pencil here for sketching lightly on my paper. I have a number 10 Blick Golden Taklon round brush, which is a very nice brush, by the way. And one of my favorites is the Princeton Elite, and this is a 10 as well. You can get a lot done with a size 10 brush. And I also have a kneaded eraser, which is nice for removing pencil marks. You're going to need some sort of a mixing tray. This is just a little plastic top. And I have a Yarka paint set. It's a little messy, isn't it? This is a great set that you can purchase. We have kits here at the Art Center as well if you need to purchase something. Another nice one is this one, and this is collegiate, I believe, semi-moist. That's another nice set. So sometimes we use, or a lot of times we use pigments from the tube, and this is my palette, one of my palettes, and you can see that the pigments are positioned around the outer edge of the tray, and right now they're dry. So all I need to do when I want to reactivate them is to just get them damp with some water. So, you know, we have tube paints, but we have the sets as well, which are nice to work from. Okay, so I'm gonna move that over. I like to have my materials ready. I have my paint in front of me, excuse me, my paper in front of me, and I have my other materials to the side so that I can reach them easily. So anyway, here we go. Here's my one of my examples I wanted to show you. This is a piece by Milton Avery, 1940. He worked a lot from memory and a lot from his imagination. And I would call this a monochromatic piece, but I think it's just so interesting. It's a watercolor. The values are very interesting. In other words, the lights and darks, and the whole subject matter is super cool, I think, for a winter scene with that owl ready to land somewhere. It tells a nice story. I think this is a very nice photograph as well. You know, kind of a sunset situation with some trees and some pine trees in the distance, and a lake, and the shadows that we're seeing on the snowy scene. So these are kind of a typical landscape you might see in Minnesota, I would say. And here's one that I did that was kind of fun to make. And we've got the trees, the pine trees in the distance, and the other trees in the foreground, and then some dry brush work at the bottom of this piece. So, you know, landscapes are a lot of fun to make. So let's see what we can do here today. What I'm going to do is I've drawn out a little plan, and you'll want to get your watercolor paper ready, and I would say to have it horizontal. And we're going to just draw this out. I've drawn mine, but I know that it's probably difficult for you to see it, so we will I will do it in marker so that you can see it a little bit better. Okay. We think about the horizon line when we're doing a landscape, and where is that horizon line going to be positioned. We want to stay away from the center of the paper, and in this case I'm raising it up a bit so that my horizon line is a high excuse me, a high horizon. So not so much sky, but a little bit more in the land area. So that's important. Don't divide it in half. And think about your shapes for your land that you have going on, and try to create shapes that are, or distances that are a little bit different so that your shapes are interesting. Okay, so we're working with our pencil, and we're working lightly so that we don't want to press too hard on the watercolor paper. So here we go. I'm going to start right here, and I would find about 3/4 of the way up. And so this mark that I'm going to make is going to come from here and sort of scoot down to about there. Okay? So go ahead and just draw this first mark. The second line I'm going to make is going to come right about here and sort of meet this, but I'm going to scoot it over a little bit more to there. I can talk a little bit louder. I'm seeing that Susan asked the question about my voice. It is a bit soft, but I have a mask on, so that could be part of the problem. I'll try and speak up a little bit more. The next line that I'm going to make is not going to be directly adjacent to this line. I'm going to come down a bit and make it come across here and meet about there. So I have some interesting intersections. The next line is going to be from here to about here. And I'm going to scoot this around a little bit so there's a curve to it. And then come here. So we're just basically organizing. There's a couple people on the chat, and then someone who needs to be entered in to the waiting room. Okay, so I'm also thinking about the foreground. So we think about the background, the middle ground, and then we think about the foreground. So the foreground, I'm going to just have come about here and maybe come up like that. Okay, so this part I'm going to think about being water, or could be ice, could be still frozen, could be starting to break up a little bit. If you don't want it to be water, you can just have that be land as well. So, and we're going to be adding our trees at the end.
That's what, this won't record, so you should be okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so get your paper organized, your watercolor paper organized, and then we'll get started. Okay. I'll leave it up here a couple minutes, a couple more minutes. We're thinking about the colors that we're going to use. I like, if you have two paints, I like ultramarine blue. I think that's really nice for the sky. We can also mix that ultramarine blue with a little bit of orange to give it a bit of a gray for the shadows. So we'll think about that. I'm going to start with the sky. Usually with a landscape, we'll start with the sky and we'll work our way from the sky to the foreground. And once everything is dry, then we'll add the trees on top. So in watercolor, we do a lot of layering, waiting for things to dry, actually. We generally work from light to dark. So we don't always put our darks in first, we put our lighter values in, and then we can get darker as we need to as we're going along. Excuse me. All right, so does everybody have this organized on your watercolor paper?
Yes.
Perfect. Okie doke. So I'm going to move that out of the way. And here's mine. I also like to have a piece of scrap paper, watercolor paper nearby, so that I can test my colors. A lot of times I'm going to be mixing things on my tray, but I like to test the colors to see if I like them before I put them onto my watercolor paper. Okay, so let's start with the sky. Start with the sky. And I have my water. I usually will dampen, in other words, with clean water on my brush. I'm going to dampen the upper portion of the watercolor paper so that it takes the wash nicely. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way, bring my paper, my watercolor paper. I also like to have a tissue of some kind, whether it's Kleenex or paper towel, so that I could wipe my brush off if it gets too damp, too wet. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to be using the ultramarine blue. If you have the paint set like this, then this is the one I'm going to use, because you can see I've been using it a lot. It's really pretty blue. I'll show you what that's like. Real pretty blue. Okay. So clean water, and sorry about that. I'm working my way up here, getting this nice and damp. A little bit of fuzz on there, didn't I? Get out of there. Okay, so it's not a puddle, In other words, the water is not sitting up like a puddle on top of the paper. It's absorbing into the watercolor paper, into the fibers of the paper. So we want to really let that happen. Give it a minute to be able to soak down in there. So I'm going to start with that blue. And I'm thinking about my sky. I'm making what we call a wash. The wash is just going to be across the upper part here where I've dampened it. And I don't have to fill in all of it. I can just fill in parts of it, right? And I don't have to make it completely solid, in other words. I could also add a little bit of pink into that, which would make a really pretty sky. So I'll do that as I'm working along here, all right? So here's my mix. It's not too strong. It's kind of like tea, I guess I would say. Okay, so I'm just gonna take my brush and sort of work it across here, okay? And it's soft, it's moving because this is damp, okay? You want to work quickly so that you don't get hard edges. It's kind of, you know, it's dry in here and I'd have a tendency to for the paper to dry pretty quickly, but there's my sky. I think that's a nice sky. If you want to add a little bit of pink or mix a bit of pink or alizarin crimson would be a good color. In with your blue, you can brush that across and get a little bit of like a pretty purpley pink happening. Okay, so make sure that it's wet when you do this. It's nice and wet. The paper is wet, in other words. Okay, so I want that to have a couple minutes to dry before I go to the next step. And we're thinking about a little bit of purple with your blue, just pretty much like we mixed here. You could take some red and mix it with your blue if you don't have purple. Let's see what that's going to look like. Some red and blue will give you purple, right? That's a nice shade. Yeah, I like that. That's pretty. Or you can use the purple that is in your paint set if you have a paint set. They're pretty close, aren't they? Okay, so the next area that we're going to be painting will be this area here. And we're going to do that with the very pale purple that we have. But I do want to wait for this to dry, so take another minute or two for that to dry. To be patient. A lot of people, when they're painting with watercolors, will have a couple paintings going at the same time because we're waiting so often for that dry time, right, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotta wait for it.
Gotta wait. So you can always go get a cup of tea or something, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's
Coffee.
three things in the chat. I'm not sure what.
Okay, that's new.
Yeah.
Oh, those are the old ones.
Okay. Okay.
That's right. They don't
Okay.
listen.
So we're thinking about these hills that are in the distance. Remember that things that are farther away are going to appear lighter, less detailed, right? And as things get closer to us, they become more detailed and the value would increase. In other words, they would get a bit darker. So we'll do this area here in our lightest light, and then this area here will be a little bit darker, okay? To give that appearance of perspective. Excuse me. So I think this is dry enough. again, I'm mixing up a very light value of my purple. I can put it with the blue as well. If you want to gray it up a little bit, you can use some orange, just a little bit. That will give you a nice warm gray. We don't really want it to be orange, but the orange with the blue creates a nice gray. Okay, if you have a color pigment called burnt sienna, that's another one that will work really nicely. Okay, so that's the color I'm going to use. And so I'm doing the same thing here. I don't have to dampen this because it's such a small area, but I'm going to go ahead and paint this. Oh, that's a little bit too dark. There we go. Okay, so with watercolor, the more water you use, the lighter the value will be. Right? The more pigment you use, the stronger your color will be. So this is just a nice little area back here. Again, it doesn't have to be all completely uniform. If you need to remove pigment, simple way to do it is to rinse your brush, dry it off with your tissue, and then pull the brush, sort of use some pressure on it to push down, and it will help, it will remove a bit of pigment if you need to do that. Okay, so there we go. The next area that I'm going to paint, and again, I need to wait just a tad because I don't want these two to run together. If I want them to merge, then it's fine to paint them now. But I'm going to let it just set just a bit. And I'm going to go in with a little darker pigment here. Not too dark, but just a little bit darker. So I'm mixing up that purple with a little bit of blue. And I think that's just about right, but I want to test it and see. So these are washes that we're doing right now. That's the color that I made. I think that's pretty. Maybe a little bit blue. That's fun to have a little spot to mix your colors. There. Okay. There we go. That's very nice. All right, so I'm going to do this area here. I can get it a little bit damp because it's a little bit bigger area, but you don't have to because, like I said, I'm going pretty fast as I do this. Make sure your brush strokes go all the way to the edge, all the way to the edge of your watercolor paper. And I might get a little bit darker here. So I just put a little bit deeper pigment right there into the wash on top of it. Okay, that's looking nice. I like that bit of pink right there. That looks kind of fun. Okay. I'm going to move over here. This is going to be a little bit darker as well, just a bit. And again, I'm sort of mixing the same colors together, aren't I, to do this, but they are...
Excuse me.
Yes.
Judy Davis wants to know what was the second color you used in the second mountain.
Judy, this was purple and blue with a little tiny bit of orange in it. Right about here. Right about here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to work here, and I'm going to get a little tiny bit darker, but I'm going to leave some patches of white for the snow, because I'm thinking, oh, there's still some snow along here at the bottom of this little area. So I want to just leave some. So when we're thinking about the snow, we need to reserve or save the white of the paper, right? So that it will sparkle through. So I'm going to leave a bit of that and work in this area right about here. Thinking about, oh, that's too dark. There, that's better. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so just leave some snowy areas, or actually just paper white. Does that kind of look like snow? I think that's pretty good, huh?
Sure. Looks good.
Okay. So I'm thinking that this area here, I'm just going to make that a little bit, pull some of that pigment out of there a little bit. Okay. So I'm thinking that this area here, you could have this be water if you want to, or you could have it just be a big area of snow. And I think that's what I'll do. I'm thinking that this is just a really nice open area, that like a field we see so often here in Minnesota. So I'm going to leave that pretty much alone, but I'm going to make some shadows here. And simply doing that would be just to make some marks that are curved with my brush, and I'm going to show you how to do it, and then you can do it. Make some marks that are curved here and there. And then once you've made those marks with your brush, take your brush that's clean with water on it and go below it to soften. You see how that makes a nice shadow or a snowy patch. Okay, so here's this one. I'm going to soften that as well below it. And maybe here too. There might be a little bit of shadow under this area here, and you can take the side of your brush with a little pigment on it and move it across this way to give you a little bit of nice textural. Okay. Another fun thing to do is in a wash or a mark that you've made with your brush, you can take the tip of your brush with a bit of pigment on it and touch the base of it. Do you see what I did? I'll do another sheet of paper so you can see. Just a nice little technique. Here's this. Okay, so we did two things. We did one where we put clean water below it, see, so that enlarges the area, doesn't it? But another fun thing to do is to take a bit of pigment on your brush, and we're still using very diluted paint, aren't we? but there's a bit of pigment on my brush and I can touch it here. Do you see what that does? So that sort of gives you a nice, interesting look. This works well for lots of other things to touch that bottom of a wash with the pigment so that it flows into that wash. And I like to tip it a little bit here and there and let it move. Okay. This is still nice and wet, so it's sort of doing that nicely, isn't it? And if you want to have some harder edges for your snowy area here, then just take your brush with a little bit more pigment on, pigment on it, excuse me, and just run it across here to create some harder edges. And that is called dry brush, right? You can do that. So we used a few different techniques here. We used the barrel of the brush to get some textural bits in through here. We did some softening and we did some hard edges too with our brush. So this has all been done with just a couple colors. So we call this a limited palette. It looks pretty cold though, doesn't it? If I had wanted to warm it up, I could have used a little warmer color, but that's okay. So I'm going to do a bit more down here, and then I'm going to add my trees. So we want to have it be completely dry before we add any trees. So I'm going to work in these corners here and sort of get a little bit of paint here on that corner, just so that we don't have that white paper showing quite so much on the corners. Kind of gives it a nice feel. Okay. So give it a minute to dry, and then we'll add our trees. Any ideas, Tom? I think this one's really pretty, you know, with the way that the trees are in this picture.
Those birches?
Yeah, they're birches.
Yeah, those are nice. I go with them.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to completely copy a photo image that you might have. You can just use parts of it. And I like how these trees are positioned close here. Then there's another one on the other side. I think that's really a nice composition. Okay, so we'll let that dry a little bit and then we'll get to the next part. Right. If you wanted to do a sunset while this is drying, how much time do we have?
40 minutes or 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay. I'll just quickly, just so that you can see, if you wanted to do a sunset for your picture, let's see here. Use this piece right here. I would do the same idea here of wetting the top portion of the paper where the sky is going to be. But if you wanted to make a sunset, okay, I would say to start with your yellow, oops, and get that yellow in there, and then add a bit of pink, which would be really pretty. Okay, so I would think about where, whoops, that's got a little bit of green in it. That's okay. Get that yellow in there and then add a bit of pink to that yellow. You'll get a really pretty peach, actually. Okay, and then you can finish the top area with your blue if you want to. So you can always change a sky up by, obviously, with the different colors that you use. So that's a simple sunset. And you would do the same, the process would be very much the same. We would let that dry, and then we would do the hills in the distance, and then let it all dry, and then add your trees on top. Okay, so I just thought that might be fun to give you an idea about that. All right, so this is pretty good, ready to go. I'm going to think about my trees and where do I want to put them. You can certainly draw them if you feel that you need to know where they're going to go, which is good to know where they're going to go. But I mean, you can draw them, at least get them set up of where they're going to be on the paper. So I'm thinking right about here, and I like to just draw a line there, and I know that they're going to go all the way up, and maybe another one. I'm going to look at this photo image because I think it's really nice, and another one maybe here. So these are all sort of on the same, they're all in the same area here. If I had some that were farther in the distance, then they would be smaller, wouldn't they? They would be smaller and not very detailed, and they would be up here, which we could certainly do that if we wanted to. So what I'm thinking about these trees here, and I'm going to make 3 of them, okay? So I'm just sort of organizing them. And I want to have them so they're not the same distance apart necessarily, but okay, and maybe they're positioned, one's tilting a little that way. And again, I'm looking at this. Okay, so you can practice a tree before you paint it. Let's do that real quick. And so I'm going to think about my tree. Here's one. I'm going to start it here. Okay, there's a little mark for it. And I'm going to mix up the color that I want. Now, you can choose the colors that you're going to make, use for your tree. This one here, this is done with blues and a little bit of gray. Okay, so I'm just going to use the color that I have here on my palette. And I could put a little bit of brown with it too if I want to. That'll be nice. That's really pretty with the blue and the brown and the purple. I like that. So I don't want these to be too transparent because I'd like to try and get this done in one go. But if your tree is very light when you paint it, then you can always go over it again once it's dry. Right, Tom?
Yes, you can do that.
You can do that. So mix up a color that you like. Remember, your palette here on this painting has got a lot of blue in it and purple. So it's nice to use those colors. Putting in a bit of brown makes it look pretty good. So,
Sure.
okay, so let's see what that color's like. Yeah, that's a nice color. If I want to warm it up, I put a little more brown. I could also add burnt sienna. That would really warm it up. Let's see how that is. See, that's quite a bit different, but I do like that. So I think that's what I'll go with. Okay, so let's think about a tree. Think about the trunk of the tree, and you can make your first mark go all the way up to the top of the paper. So I'm starting here for the trunk, and I'm going to take my brush and just go all the way up. Now you can see, got a little bit of dry brush happening there, don't I? Which is very nice, especially if the trees are closer to you. So it gives a bit of texture. And I'll show you what you can do with that in a second. But while it's still wet, I need to decide where my light source is coming from. So let's say that it's going to be a little bit darker on this side, I think. So I'm going to take my brush while it's wet, and I'm going to shade this side of the tree so it's a little bit darker. but it needs to still be wet before you do that. And you can add some textural marks in there as well. Now this area here where the dry brush is, we can just go over it with your brush and you still see that texture, which is so cool. Okay, so there's my trunk. If I need it to be darker, I can still go in there while it's damp. But once it starts to dry, you got to give it a little time to set up. While it's still wet, I'm going to do my branches. So branches can be done, the thicker branches are closer to the bottom of the tree. The farther you get away from the trunk and from the base of the tree, the thinner and more narrow the branches are. So I'm using my brush to do the tip of my brush to do the small little strokes, but I'm going to use, you know, more of the brush to get those branches in. So here we go. I'm just thinking about one starting right about here. So I'm in the trunk area and I'm bringing this up. Okay. And then just some little marks here to create the branches. Pretty simple, but something to practice, you know, and think about working from a thicker mark to a thinner mark. And then at the bottom of the branch, it would be a bit darker. So you can get these done pretty much in one go, so you don't have to go over it again. However, you can always go over it if you want to. Now I'm kind of out of paint, so I need to mix up a little bit more paint. Got that. That's another important thing to remember, is to have enough paint ready for when you're working. So here's another one. Okay, and you don't even have to show all of it. You can just show bits of it, the branches. Okay, so now I'm ready to move back to my painting here. And I'm going to do that, but I do want to mix up a little more paint so I don't run out. Okay. And I got that blue. So I'm mixing it. And again, I want to test it. And I think that looks really nice with the color palette that I've got going on here. Okay. This is tilting on me today. Okay. There. So blue, purple, and a bit of brown. I keep getting darker, don't I? All right, so I'm going to anchor my hand on the table and I'm going to do these trees now. So you can look at a picture of a tree, or you can look at the picture that I've got here. Think about those branches. Now these are birches. Birches are a little different technique. We've done a video on the birches, haven't we, Tom? I think.
Yes, we have. It should be on the website.
Yeah, it's probably on the website, so you can maybe pick that up. We have a lot of wonderful classes here at the Art Center. And it's just been a lot of fun doing these. So check it out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this, these trees here. And I like to start with a little bit of a scoopy brush stroke. And then I'm going to bring it all the way up. It's a little bit darker on this side. So I want to shade it a bit on this side while it's still wet. I don't want a hard edge. It can be intermittent. In other words, I'm not doing it all exactly the same. Here we go. And I can create a little bit of a pile of snow here at the base by making a bit of a scoopy mark. You see that? And now I'm ready to get some branches in there. And I'm going to keep them really simple. I don't want to go right here. I'd like to go above it. Make it a little bit more of an interesting composition. So I'm just bringing that up. A little bit darker beneath it. Okay, so then I'll maybe add another branch over on the other side. So you don't have to get super detailed with this, just keep it simple. Should be good. Okay, so I'm going to get these other trees in. I think I'll have this one kind of tilting this way a little bit. I dipped into a tiny bit of blue just to get some a little more cool color in here for the shading of this particular tree. Now remember that watercolor is going to dry lighter, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to turn it around the other way here. It's easy to bring these branches towards me. I want to avoid that corner. Maybe there's one down here. I think that it's so fun in the winter to be able to see the branches of the trees and just really study them, because you really can, of course, get a good view of them right now because there's no leaves on them. Right, that's good. Maybe there's another one right about here. Maybe it goes behind that one. Okay, so create a bit of layering. Maybe a branch goes behind the trunk. And so quickly I'm going to add this other one, and then we'll finish this up. And I think we'll have time for you all to show your work in progress. We have some other Zoom classes set up for down the road, I believe. Some other things, there's a drawing and another watercolor one, so stay tuned. So this one's kind of cute here, and the way this tree is. So I'm kind of like, again, making a base for this tree and also creating a bit of snow, a snow pile underneath it. If by chance your tree is sort of see-through, in other words, transparent, don't worry. All you have to do is, once it's dry, just go over it again to give it a little more of a solid look, because we don't want see-through trees, I don't think. Well, maybe there are see-through trees somewhere. I doubt it. Just kidding. Okay. So you can skip when you do your branches too. You don't have to do too much. So what this is doing is creating a nice little focal area here. Plus it brings us up into the painting, but then I'm also looking through it throughout the piece as well. So we'll add our shadows in a sec. I'm going to go in with a little bit of a warmer color here, which is the yellow ochre, this one right here in your set, if you have this set. I'm going to do just some sprigs of grasses that might be popping up here. And that is on a dry surface. And I'm just using my brush to sort of draw a little bit here. It also is giving this a bit of warmth. And it can just be super simple like that. And maybe a little bit over here. Now you could certainly, if you have time, add another tree or two in this on the other side, but just make sure that it's just maybe one tree at the most. Okay, so shadows real quick. I want to think about the color that I have in the sky to create my shadows so that it makes the whole piece cohesive. And I'm thinking about where the light is coming from. So I'm assuming that the light is coming from this area here. And so that's why this side was had a little bit of shading to the side of the tree. So that means that my shadows would be going this way. So with the shadows, I would just take your brush with a very, very pale blue and just kind of bring them down just a little bit, okay? And that's all that you really need to do. Just avoid that corner. Just avoid the corner. So that was just a little bit of the blue with the brown with it to create that nice gray. Okay, so I would do a little of a shadow underneath some of this here. Whoops. You can use your tissue to move it if you need to. Now you could always, if you have time, you could always put a little bird on one of the branches. That would be sweet. Anything like that would be nice. But I think this gives you a nice little idea of a simple winter landscape. And if you want this to be an icy little lake or something like that, then just use your brush on the side of it to do that. Nice dry brush across there. I think all the ice houses are off, aren't they, Tom?
They better be.
They better be.
I believe they have another week up north.
They have another week up north, okay. So how are we doing on time?
You got about 4 minutes.
Okay, so another tree could go here. You know, you can think about positioning it not on the ice. I'm just kidding. Maybe down a little farther, but not at the bottom of your paper. Just bring it up to about here if you're going to do another tree. So we'll have a time for you guys to share. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.